Hello Little Berry true crime fans, welcome back to my second channel. Now, been a long time coming with this one. I've spent weeks researching this case, and I've actually got something very different and a bit of a special treat for you. I have a guest on the show. After I've done my normal report, I will introduce you to a friend of mine called Says Francis, who runs a channel called Says Francis. She's one of my oldest YouTube friends, but she also runs this amazing channel where she talks about Disney, she talks about autism, and she's just generally a lovely, bubbly personality. And like me, she's got a very inquisitive mind. She's very good at critical thinking. She thinks outside the box, and I think she's just a wonderful, wonderful guest to have on the show. And I've given permission for her to upload that part of the show to her channel so her viewers can see it too. This is about the unexplained death of Stephen Paul Hilder. On the 4th of July 2003, Stephen Paul Hilder fell 4,000 metres to his death at Hibbleston Airfield in Lincolnshire, UK. Despite extensive investigation, what happened to Stephen Hilder remains a mystery to this day. Stephen was born on the 12th of December 1982 in Hereford, and he, at the time of his death, was 20 years old. He was working at the Defence Academy of the United Kingdom in Wiltshire. In November 2001, Stephen started skydiving, and he very, very quickly absolutely fell head over heels in love with it. Everyone has a passion. I'm a firm believer in that. And when we find what it is we're passionate about, what we love doing, we will do anything we can to keep doing it, especially when it comes to things that give us a rush of adrenaline and endorphins. Skydiving is an extreme sport. People who do this kind of thing are known as adrenaline junkies. And that's a really good term because it's kind of an addiction. Over the next 18 months, Stephen amassed around 300 jumps, and he was a student at the time, but he actually maxed out credit cards. He got into serious debt just so he can keep doing this. He spent a lot of money not only on equipment but just on jumps themselves. Now, this is how dedicated skydivers are to what they do. Is often when they go to an event, even though accommodation will be there to, they can use it, it costs money, and quite a lot of them just end up sleeping out of their cars, pitching a tent, or going to, around a friend's house or whatever. They would rather do that. They'd rather sleep in cars and tents than pay for accommodation when the money they could spend on accommodation they could use to do more jumps. Stephen even went abroad to do some training and do some qualifications, because you have to have a certain level of qualifications to be able to dive solo, to be able to pack your own parachutes even. And Stephen he really had accomplished an awful lot in 18 months. He was also passionate about a career in the military. Now, he was a little bit concerned about whether or not he'd failed his exams. Now, I've seen conflicting information that he did fail some of his exams around his death, or he thought he had, but he hadn't. So I'm not quite sure which is actually true. Skydiving facilities are typically known as drop zones because that is just generally what they are, areas where they can actually just drop out of a plane. And there is a place in Wiltshire called Netheravon, which is the one that Stephen went to almost every single weekend. For several months before Stephen's death, he was actually involved in a kind of casual relationship with a young woman he met at university. As well as skydiving, Stephen was also into drama and performance art, and this is how he met Ruth Woodhouse. Ruth was studying forensic engineering at the same university, and she used to have long discussions with Stephen about crime and whether or not the perfect murder could ever really be committed. Even though Stephen wasn't studying forensics, his girlfriend said that he was rather forensically aware. So whatever she was studying, either she taught him or she discussed with him, or he already knew, or he was into that kind of thing. But as I said, the relationship was very casual. They didn't see each other at the weekends. Stephen actually preferred spending his weekends skydiving than focusing on his love life. That just shows how much he absolutely loved the sport. He was also part of a 3-man team called Black Rain. The other 2 team members were David Mason and Adrian Blair, who were both just a year younger than Stephen. However, they were just as good as skydivers as him. They were just as qualified, they were just as experienced, which is why they were on a team together. Black Rain had won one skydiving competition before. They were doing quite well, and there was a skydiving competition for collegiate nationals in the UK, in Lincolnshire at Hibblestone Airfield in the first week of July 2003. Black Rain was due to compete, but what Stephen did is he actually got there much earlier than his teammates. He spent the 28th of June, the Saturday, taking his father to Hyde Park to see Bon Jovi. And even though it was supposed to have been a birthday present for his father, it was also for Stephen. He also loved Bon Jovi too, but it was a really good father-son bonding moment. They both had a fantastic time. Stephen was one of these people that just loved doing stuff. He was a very excited, enthusiastic person, and I believe that was a quality that he shared with his father. The Friday before, he'd been on the phone to his mum. He'd spoken to her at length about how excited he was about going to Bon Jovi with his father, but also about the skydiving competition that was taking place the following week. Stephen spent the 29th of June at Netherhaven Airfield. Very difficult to say that. And he just spent the day doing, I think he did about 2 or 3 jumps that day. I don't think he could get a lot in because it takes a lot to do a skydiving jump, so you can't get like a dozen in a day or anything like that. But the following day, Ruth actually took Stephen to Alton Towers. They spent hours there. They actually spent right up until closing there. They were having a fantastic time. After the park closed, Ruth went back home and Stephen drove instantly to Hibblestone Airfield. He didn't even bother going back to his student digs. This was a journey of over 100 miles, and I'm not quite sure what time of night he got there, but he did sleep in his car. He was one of these people that didn't bother with the accommodation. Like many people, he would rather spend as much money as he could on actually getting as many skydives in as possible. Now, it's worth pointing out that when I was researching this, one thing that the chief instructor at Hibblestone, called Paul Hilder, pointed out is that skydivers, it's not just about one person's enthusiasm, it's a team effort. You have to put your life in someone else's hands. The pilot, the instructors, your teammates, everybody around you. It's built on trust. And Paul Hilder said they have to trust each other, otherwise they just cannot do the sport. This trust extends to everything, even down to people's personal belongings. So almost everyone there, they would they would pitch their tents, but they wouldn't lock their cars. They would leave their personal belongings anywhere, and they would trust everybody to not touch anything that belonged to them. There was this closeness in the community that everyone looked out for each other, both in the air, both on the ground, and even when they weren't skydiving, if they were partying or socializing or going out or somewhere, there was this sense of community and this implicit trust in one another. And that is how skydiving is. It was no different at Hibblestone that week. Despite Stephen being very young and having crammed in lots and lots of jumps in a very, very short period of time, he was very, very hot on safety. He would go on and on and on about it. And he was a little bit cocky, a little bit arrogant, but he was an adrenaline junkie. He loved life. He was enthusiastic, but he still never, ever failed to make sure that all of the checks that took place generally, even, not just routine checks, he would be really methodical, and he would not lecture, but he would go on about it quite a bit, to the point that David and Adrian, even though they were very hot on safety, they would often do little things to annoy Stephen. They would actually mess up his parachuting pack sometimes. They would hide things, but they would do it so that Stephen would know that it had been done, because it would be part of a standard check. So there's no way that his life would have been endangered if anything had happened to his pack that he couldn't detect. That week at Hibblestone, the weather was crap. You have to have clear skies whenever you're skydiving, or near on clear skies. It can't be thunderstorm or anything. It's far too dangerous. So that week, there wasn't a lot for people to do there. other than just party and have a good time. There were no lifts at all on the Tuesday. People had to either go out or they just went, they were drinking, they were socializing. And on the Wednesday night, that is when Adrian and David rocked up to Hibblestow. David and Adrian were very close friends. They actually trained in skydiving together, and that's how they bonded. So they were, I suppose, you could say, best friends. I mean, Stephen, David and Adrian were all very close friends. They were in a team, but Adrian and David were particularly close. They went off to the cinema together when they arrived at Hibblestow because, of course, there will be no lifts. And on the same day, Stephen went into Scunthorpe and he went to a few shops and he bought a blonde wig, he bought some makeup and some shoes and some tights and a little black leather dress. The Wednesday, however, the weather was looking a little bit better. However, Stephen's teammates hadn't arrived at that point, but he wanted to make sure that he could get at least a few jumps in, just so that he could practice his technique. He did perform one lift that day, and a camera person followed him on the way down just to assess his technique, so that Adrian and David could watch it and critique his performance. The skydivers that week were hoping that they would get at least one jump in per team that week, so they could have at least a go of trying to win this competition. The way that the competition worked is that the teams would fall out of the plane together in formation, and they would change their arms and leg patterns to almost like dancing in the air, and every time they made a new formation they would earn a point. So on the Wednesday, Stephen managed to get a lift in before Adrian and David arrived. The following day, Thursday, the weather was just not having it. So, but that day, everybody there partied hard, and I mean they partied hard. This is a group of university age young people who want to have a good time. They love skydiving. They live for it. And if they can't do what they love, they'll have a damn good time another way. And Stephen, David and Adrian, amongst other people, they dressed in fancy dress for a party that night. They actually went in drag, and Stephen, in his blonde wig, he actually got up on karaoke and he sang some Bon Jovi tunes. Adrian and David joined him. It was just a really massive, raucous party, and most of it was actually filmed. People got so bladdered that night. That people, just typical of going out on a night out, if you really get absolutely plastered, you can't remember what you've done or what other people have done. You can't always recall the events at certain periods of time. The next day, people got up pretty damn late. Many of them were hoping that the weather would hold up on the Friday just to see if they could get some lifts in, and usually they'd get up quite early, and this was summertime, so of course the mornings were quite light, just to see what the weather's like, but people were so drunk that they didn't want to get up too early. In addition, there is a strict rule that there has to be 8 hours between a skydiver's last drink and whenever they go up in the air, so therefore they would need to have waited quite a bit anyway. That morning the weather wasn't too bad, and Chief Instructor Paul Hilder kept a close eye on the weather and said, okay, as long as it doesn't get really bad later in the day, we could probably get a couple of lifts in. And luckily, Stephen's team, Black Rain, and another team, I'm not quite sure what their name was, they were the first teams that were going to go up on the first plane to perform, hopefully, a competition-winning jump. In a skydiving plane, what normally happens is the teams sit at the front and the camera people sit at the back. So there was a three-man team either side and the camera people behind. The other team in the plane were due to deploy first. So once they had gone, it was then Black Rain's turn. But it is very, very important to know what the safety aspects of this are. So it's not clear whether or not Stephen actually packed his own parachute the day before. He had successfully made a lift on a couple of days before, and he'd only needed to use his main canopy, the brightly coloured one that we're used to seeing. He was qualified to pack his own parachute. Somebody else could have done it for him, but that would have cost him £5. I mean, £5 is not a huge amount of money. But at the same time, they always try and hold on to it if they can. And if he's qualified to pack his own parachute, there's every reason why he most likely did that. As part of the pre-flight checks, it is standard that not only does a skydiver check their own equipment, they also check their fellow teammates' equipment. So, as I said, it's built on trust. So, because sometimes you may miss something, but also they check the equipment both before they put on their jumpsuits, they check it before they get on the plane, and just before they're about to deploy, because while you're in the air or while you've been walking to the plane even, something might get dislodged, like with turbulence or whatever, so they always give everything a thorough check over. At about 2:30 on Friday the 4th of July 2003, Stephen, Adrian and David began their skydive. Despite getting off to a slight shaky start, the three men really started to rapidly turn their formations in the air. They had actually rehearsed it before they even got on the plane. For an intermediate team, their score was phenomenal. They actually made 19 turns in the sky. 19. That was absolutely pretty much guaranteed for them to be able to win the national championships. This was going to be massive. And the three men were so over the moon. They knew they'd done really, really well. Just before moving further forward in the story, just a little bit about the jump itself. This was a 4,000 meter or 13,000 foot drop. It takes approximately between 10 and 12 seconds for someone of Stephen, Adrian and David's mass to be able to reach terminal velocity. Now, terminal velocity is at the moment that you stop accelerating in your movement and you fall at a constant rate towards the earth. Now, for the average for a human being is approximately 120 meters per second or 200 feet per second. Parachutes are usually deployed about 4,000 feet. They can be as little as 2,000 feet, but that's really cutting it a bit fine. And the team wouldn't have had very long after reaching terminal velocity to be able to move in their formation. So they did it really, really fast. They did it really, really well. But they couldn't stay together for very long, because what has to happen is that when the formations are finished, the skydivers have to be able to move away from each other, because if skydivers either bodily collide in the air or their parachutes get tangled up, that spells disaster. So they have to move away from one another. So when they did that, they all deployed their parachutes. As he was descending, Adrian saw something that concerned him, which was some white material, a bit strange, just floating past him. And he was just focused mostly on the jump and, of course, landing, which is a very, very big part of the skydiving jump. He registered it, but he was more focused on what he was going to do. So by the time he got down to the ground and he saw that David and their camera person were descending as well, he couldn't see Stephen anywhere. Chief Instructor Paul Hollow's job was to make sure that everyone who went out came down safely. And what they normally do is they look for the distinctive colours of the parachute canopy. Every skydiver's parachute is usually quite distinctive, but nobody had seen Stephen's. Therefore, it was possible that Stephen had to use his white reserve parachute. The reserve parachute is white, and it's often very difficult to see, so you won't see bright colours. So they were looking around to see if they could find the white parachute or the other main canopy, and he used his radio to ask the other instructors if they'd seen it, and they hadn't. Then Paul Hollow saw that one of his instructors was running towards him and he was holding a white reserve parachute. Now this is extremely alarming, because if someone had to use their white reserve parachute and it's no longer attached to the skydiver, that is extremely serious. Even though a main parachute can be detached from the harness just in case it gets tangled in anything or it malfunctions in any way, a reserve parachute is permanently attached to a rig. It doesn't have clips. It cannot be manually detached. The only way that you can detach it is if using a hook knife, which is part of a skydiver's kit. They would only use it in emergencies. If it could be cut with that, or if the skydiver actually unclips their harness midair, That's the only way that it can be detached. This reserve parachute was not attached to a rig. It was not attached to a skydiver. Paul Hilder stood on a car and he scanned the cornfields, which flank all the way around Hibblestone. And the corn was really long. So if somebody was going to fall into one of the cornfields, it would be very, very easy to see where they were. And he did. He saw an indentation in one of the cornfields and realized that that is where Stephen Hilder had ended up. But this was not looking good. If Stephen had deployed his reserve parachute and he had landed in a cornfield and was not showing any signs of getting up and coming over, it can only mean one thing. And when Paul Hilder and one of his other instructors went over to the indentation, they found Stephen Hilder's body in the cornfield. He had hit the ground at terminal velocity and had unfortunately passed away. Paul Hilder looked at Stephen's rig and he knew that this was not an accident, so he called the police. The reason the police were involved in this is because this was not an accident. This was not a fluke. This was not just a chance. This was an act of sabotage. It was very, very clear that whoever did it knew A, how to sabotage a parachute beyond anything so that there's no way the skydiver could survive. They also knew how to sabotage a parachute without it being obvious to even an experienced skydiver. The way it was done would not be picked up by any kind of routine check. While looking into this case, I've done a bit of research into skydiving rigs, and I think they were a little bit different back in 2003, but not so much. On a skydiving rig, what you have is obviously it looks like a backpack, and on the outside you'll see some clips and straps, and those are what's called the risers, where the really tough nylon material that attaches the rig to the main parachute. So what normally happens is that at the very bottom of the parachute there is a little pouch, and inside this pouch is a very small, tiny little parachute called a pilot chute. The very top of the pilot chute has a little cushion that pokes out of that pouch, and it's that cushion that the skydiver pulls in order to pull out what's called the pilot chute. So if you watch how a skydiver releases their parachute, they don't just pull up the parachute. It doesn't work like that. It has to work with physics, obviously. So what happens is the pilot chute lifts up into the air and inflates. And what it does is it actually sort of catches the air. There is a long cord from the pilot chute called the bridle, which connects all the way through the backpack and to a pin which holds the flaps of the backpack together. When that pin is pulled, after the bridle is pulled taut from the pilot chute, the flaps are then open when the pin is released, and that releases the main parachute. In Stephen's case, the bridle had been cut. So when he deployed his pilot chute, the pilot chute just flew away. There was no way at all that he could get that pin released. It's beyond the reach of the skydiver. If the pilot chute doesn't pull the pin, there's no way that the skydiver can release it. Now, on the other side of the rig is another little cushion poking out of a little pocket, and that pulls out the pilot chute to the reserve parachute. When that pilot chute is released, there is another bridle that goes all the way through the rig, and what you'll notice on a backpack is a little circle, and that is a spring that when the pin is pulled on that, the spring comes out and the reserve canopy is opened. And as I said, the reserve canopy is permanently attached to the rig. The risers are very tough and they're very thick nylon webbing, and there's usually 4 of them. So there's one on one shoulder and one on the back of the shoulder, and then the other 2 shoulders. They then come together, then they then go into even finer webbing, which of course then goes into the main canopy. The risers of the reserve parachute were actually underneath 2 flaps on the arm straps, as it were, of Stephen's parachute. On the outside there would be the risers of the main parachute, which do have clips and they can become detached if necessary, but underneath that were the risers of the reserve parachute, 2 on each side. What had happened was that someone had pulled the flaps open and cut both risers on both sides of Stephen's reserve parachute. So when he tried to deploy his reserve parachute, the spring opened, It all worked, except the fact that his risers were cut. So the parachute just flew away. So Stephen was falling, and he probably knew within seconds of that, I'm going to die here. I don't know whether he deliberately aimed for the cornfield in the hope that the corn might help to cushion his fall, but unfortunately it didn't. He could have ended up on the road. He could have ended up on the runway. I think he probably knew what was going to happen and he was aiming for the field. I don't know. I don't know how skydiving works. If I'm wrong, please correct me, but that's just my thinking, possibly. So Stephen's parachute had been deliberately sabotaged. Nobody on the airfield was allowed to leave, and there was another reason for this, not just because of suspects, but every single rig in the entire vicinity of Hibblestow had to be inspected. This could be a case of several people's parachutes being sabotaged. Everybody checked both the bridles of their main canopy, and also the reserve parachutes were also deployed on the ground on every single one of them. Now that's very unusual because reserve parachutes are very rarely used, and every 10 years they have to be repacked just so they don't get too stiff. But to pack a reserve parachute, that's something that only someone who's qualified can actually do, and that costs money. But it's best to be safe than sorry, and it turned out that it was only Stephen's parachute that had been sabotaged. Not another rig had been touched. The police consulted with skydiving experts to be able to retrieve samples of Stephen's rig. They figured that if somebody had physically taken some sort of sharp instrument and sabotaged that parachute, if they had been just doing it with their bare hands, they may have left some DNA. A skydiving expert was asked to cut some samples from the webbing. He was given a pair of scissors that had a very loose screw, and they weren't very sharp. Using these scissors, he just could not cut those samples. So what he did was he asked for a hook knife. It looks a little bit like a box cutter, but the plastic part of it is hooked over and there's a sharp little bit underneath it. So it can actually be used in that kind of motion. And that cut through the webbing perfectly well. But unfortunately, there was a bit of misunderstanding between the police and the skydiving experts. The police interpreted what the skydiving experts are saying is that there's no way that any scissors could cut through that webbing. It had to have been done with a hook knife. And because every single rig had a hook knife, they had to seize every single hook knife in that vicinity and test them all. What they were testing for was fibers identical to the fibers of Stephen's webbing. They would be very, very distinctive. But unfortunately, none of the hook knives showed any positive results. Stephen himself was investigated, and that's always an essential part of a murder inquiry. People always try to look for motive. Who would have a reason for wanting Stephen dead? It didn't seem that he had any enemies. It seemed that everybody really liked him. He was loud, and he was a bit cocky, a bit arrogant, a bit leery, maybe very jovial, but that apparently is what skydivers generally are like. They're fun-loving people. The footage of the party was watched as well. There were no arguments, no fights, no tensions, nothing. It was just one big, amazingly happy party. There was some rumour of Stephen having a disagreement with one person at that time, but it was never substantiated. On Tuesday, the 1st of July, Stephen travelled 11 miles to a petrol station called Kirk's Corner. Now, this baffled police for several reasons. One, why did he have to go all the way there when there were closer petrol stations to Hibblestow? And when they examined his car, they found that it was virtually out of petrol. Why did he not fill it up while he was there? While he was at Kurt's Corner, he bought some snacks, but it is actually unclear as to why he went there. Later on in my discussions with Cez, I will explain why I think this is a red herring. Now, the problem is who had access to Stephen's rig? All the rigs were kept in their bags, on hooks, on pegs, in what's called the kit room. And the kit room was available and open to everybody pretty much all the time. It was locked at the end of the day. I'm not sure what time that would have been, but anybody had access to anybody's rig. Stephen's rig was black, white and grey. I don't think his actual parachute canopy was, though. Quite a lot of the time, parachutes packs they have sort of brighter colours, whereas Stephen's didn't have any. That made me think that someone must have known that that was Stephen's rig. And if you are going to commit murder in this way, and there were 70 skydivers there at this time, or maybe even more than that. I've heard that it was up to about maybe 100 people. When you've got like 70 to 100 rigs, you have to be absolutely sure, if you're going to commit murder, that you're getting the right person. Unless someone just wanted to sabotage somebody's parachute, and it didn't matter who it was. I'm not sure whether Stephen's parachute was on the same peg as his Black Rain teammates. I don't know in which order they were in. But it just seems really strange that this was the only rig that was sabotaged. Not even another one had been attempted to have been sabotaged. If you get the wrong person, because sometimes I don't think they even share parachutes, but what if he'd lent his parachute to somebody? There is the possibility that whoever did it did get the wrong person. They were intending it to be someone else. But as I said, you would expect that they would know 100% who that is. It's not the sort of thing that you do lightly or on a whim. Every single person there was DNA tested. Every single person was. The whole place was searched. Everybody was interviewed, especially Adrian and David. They knew Stephen better than anybody there, because Stephen didn't normally go up to Hibblestow. I don't know if he'd been there before. Even though this was a nice close-knit community, there were at the time around 4,000 skydivers in the UK. But Stephen didn't know a lot of people there. He made friends easily. But who would have had such a beef with him in such a short period of time to want to have him dead? And on the Wednesday, his parachute was working fine. So it must have happened between the Wednesday and the Friday. So a very short window. Adrian and David arrived on Wednesday. So Adrian and David were suspects from the very beginning. And a few months after Stephen's death, they were actually arrested. They were detained for 48 hours and then for another 48 hours after appeal to the court, but they were actually eventually released without charge. Another man was arrested, a 24-year-old student from Leeds, but his name and the reason why he had been arrested has never been released. Now, this is very strange because an arrest is not something the police do lightly. And out of the 70 people that were there, of course, Adrian and David, without being disrespectful, would normally be high up on the list because they knew Stephen most of all. They knew his rig most of all, and they were just as qualified as him to know the anatomy of a rig inside out. But this other person, I'm not sure exactly what it was that meant that he was ultimately arrested, but he was also released without charge. Even though the police treated it as murder, first of all, over time, they started to think, was this suicide? The sabotage had been carried out in a way that a routine check would not have picked it up, because there's no reason at all to open up the flaps and check the risers of the reserve. That is just not something they do. They check to make sure the flaps are not open or untucked. Also, it's not part of a standard check to pull out the pilot chute of the main canopy to check the bridle. As long as the pilot chute is safely tucked into its pouch, there would be no reason at all why it would need to be pulled out to be checked. In addition, most rigs, and Stephen's did, had a device called a cypress. Now, the cypress is a device that cuts the wire of the reserve canopy to open up the spring to deploy it. So if a parachutist finds they physically cannot deploy their main or reserve parachute, or if they become unconscious midair or something like that, the cypress will fire and will deploy the reserve for them. So therefore, that is another safety mechanism they have. It usually deploys between 4 and 2,000 feet. Stephen did actually activate his Cypress before he actually got on the plane. And before they got on the plane, Stephen checked Adrian and David's rigs, and David checked Stephen's rig. These samples that were taken from Stephen's rig were DNA tested, but it was found there were multiple different DNA samples from people. Not just Stephen, there would have been from anyone who first arrived on the scene, anyone who'd ever previously handled his parachute. It was just inconclusive. Stephen's car was also inspected. Stephen actually kept his car keys in his car in the ignition. This is how much people trusted each other. But what was interesting was that even though his car was unlocked and the keys were in the ignition, the boot was locked. Now, I'm not sure what car Stephen drove. I know some cars at certain times, to lock the boot, you can do that without a key. You can just push the button and then it automatically locks it. So I don't know if Stephen's car was one of those cars where the boot would automatically lock or not. You know, if you trust everybody that much, why you would lock the boot but leave the rest of the car unlocked with the keys in the ignition? When Stephen's car was searched, some kitchen scissors were actually found in his car, just blatantly sitting there in his car. But because the skydiving expert said it must have been a hook knife that caused the sabotage, even though the scissors were captured and put into a bag, they weren't high up on the level of priority for testing. It later transpired that actually what the skydiving expert told the police was that the scissors that he had specifically been given, which were just crap scissors, they were physically incapable of cutting through the webbing. And instead of asking for better scissors, he asked for a hook knife. So that made the police believe that a hook knife was the only thing that could have caused that sabotage. When this mistake was identified, the police actually did test those scissors, and they found that those were the implements used to carry out this sabotage. Because when cutting the webbing, because it's very tough, because it's very, very fibrous, lots of different pieces of fiber would have just come up in a cloud. Lots of different fibers would have settled on the scissors, on the hands of whoever used those scissors, and therefore they tested the scissors for DNA, but only Stephen's was found on those scissors. That evidence, plus the fact that the same little fibers were found on Stephen's clothes underneath his jumpsuit, as well as over his jumpsuit, coupled with his debts and that his relationship with Ruth wasn't really going anywhere, that made people think that possibly Stephen committed suicide, but may have wanted to make it look like murder. However, that forensic evidence is actually, it doesn't hold water, because Stephen did actually check his rig before he put on his jumpsuit, so while he was wearing his t-shirt or whatever. After the rig had been sabotaged, the fibers would have been all over that rig. So of course, Stephen checking his rig, he would have got fibers over him. He then put on his jumpsuit. He then put the rig over the top, so of course more fibers got onto the jumpsuit. Whoever carried out the sabotage was so methodical, they surely would have thought to have used gloves, and gloves are an essential part of the skydiving kit. So this forensic evidence doesn't really go in the favour of murder or suicide. It could be either or. If you remember what I said, that the boot of his car was locked, it just seems really strange that if someone had gone into his car and planted those scissors, why would they even bother locking the boot of the car? And of course, why would Stephen bother locking the boot of his car when the rest of the car was unlocked? And everybody kept their cars that way. Everybody left their keys or left their cars unlocked. So anybody could have had access to those scissors. And Ruth Woodhouse, Stephen's girlfriend, rightly pointed out that if he had committed suicide only to make it look like a murder, because he left no note or any indication whatsoever that he was planning to take his life, why would he leave the scissors in the car? He'd also set his Cypress before he got on the plane. Now, that could have been just a way of getting through one of the routine checks, because he knew that one of his teammates would check his rig, and they most likely would check that the Cypress had been activated. So that to me doesn't hold any water. But what gets me is that when Stephen was falling, he tried to deploy both of his parachutes. Why would he even bother even attempting to deploy the main parachute? Why would he have only have just sabotaged his reserve? David Mason carried out the check on Stephen's rig. However, this was just before they got on the plane. There's no way he could have sabotaged the parachute then. There's no way he would have seen the sabotage. It was just not part of the routine check to open up the flaps of the reserve risers. It was not part of a routine check to pull out the pilot chute of the main canopy. And when David was interviewed by the police and skydiving experts, it was agreed there was no way that David would have been able to even remotely even think that Stephen's rig had been tampered with. 9 months after Stephen's death, the coroner declared this to be an open verdict, and this is how it's remained ever since. I don't know if the case has been reopened. I don't know if people are still looking at this. I'm not sure what's happening with it, but I really do hope that answers come with this. Now, when it comes to theories and potential suspects, this is where I'm going to hand it over to the discussion I had with Cez. This was a couple of weeks ago now, and I do apologise to Cez for the delay in doing this, because she did an amazing job with her research. I gave her all the information she needed, and she did so much of her own research. She really looked into a lot of information. So I'm not going to repeat myself here. I'm going to now play the discussion I had with Cez. And if you want to go check out her channel, I'll put a link to it in the description below. And thank you very much for watching. I am very interested to hear your thoughts. And I just wish to say, I do believe that someone out there knows what happened. Even though the police wrote to every single skydiver in the UK, nothing really came of it. They tried that twice and it didn't work. They went international, that didn't work. But thank you very much for watching this, and I now hand it over to Cez. Hello there everybody, this is the second part of the video about Stephen Hilder, and with me is my good friend Cez. Hello!
Hello!
Cez, like me, is a really keen internet sleuth, and we have been discussing this case, and it's got both of us scratching our heads. It's a really interesting case, and one thing about unsolved cases, because all of my previous cases are pretty much all solved, this is the first unsolved case I've done on my channel, and this is what I want to do with unsolved cases. I want to be able to discuss them with people, and this isn't to accuse anybody of anything, this is just to discuss potential theories. So Cez, how are you, by the way?
Yeah, I'm not good. I'm not good. I'm good, thank you. I've just been keeping busy, really. But with the theory as well, I've taken all the trouble, really, to write 6 pages of all the things that I've done research and what my theories are. And
oh my god,
I don't know what. Yeah, I didn't know why I did that, but I'm just like, yeah, you know what, just go for it.
Yeah. Do you want to maybe read what you've written, or summarise what you've written, so we can get an insight to your thoughts?
Yes, of course. So on there, I put like the little bit of what happened, like an introduction, and then I asked myself questions about what happened and who was to blame, because I've also got my family and friends on board. Because after I written it, I sent the manuscripts to them, and I asked them through the email who done it. And none of them just given any answer, but my dad, who is a big fan of crime-solving novels, he was talking to me about it constantly, and I thought, okay, just I can see your point there. But then, yeah, anyway, so I'd done like a little bit of a background about like names of his friends, his girlfriend, his team, and probably just a little bit about the footage and what happened and how the police were called and all of that, really.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so do you want to maybe just sort of summarise what you've written and then sort of go into what your theories are, and we can discuss that, or do you want me to start? It's up to you, I don't mind.
Okay, I might do a little bit of it, but because I know I've written like one page of it and then just police investigation, but I'll read a little bit of the background just as to see. So this is at the beginning. I just put the date and then what happened, but the background I wrote, but I might do one of it just so it won't make it back too long. But I wrote for the background, Stephen was a 20-year-old army cadet and a skydiving enthusiast who became an officer candidate at the Defence Academy of the United Kingdom in Wiltshire. And I apologise if I spelt the names wrong, really, because my pronunciation and the Queen's English is so bad.
Don't worry.
And then I just put like who his friends were and who his girlfriend was and how old they were, and because his two friends are about 2 years younger than him. But I also explained how they had a passion for skydiving and their team name and the background of the competitions. But they entered in July 2003, in July 2003, they entered the week-long British Progay, I think. I can't pronounce it. But
don't worry, it's fine.
But it's basically it's the British Parachute Association Championship. And on the afternoon, just before about 3 o'clock, they took off because there was a bit of footage on this because because they were like filming because on the skydiving competition they have to send it to judges. So they had last footage of the three of them going down. And then that's it. That was the last time anyone saw of Stephen. Yeah. And then by the time he was gone, his emergency white parachute, or the reserved parachute, was floating from the sky. And it was obvious that something was wrong, because if a skydiver sees a reserved parachute, then that means something's wrong. Yeah. And then his body was found. And the police were immediately called. And from what I understand during the investigation, the police asked for every single participant, and there were 70 of them who
there was. Yeah, I think I read somewhere there was actually closer to 100 because some people were coming and going, and some people were like visiting because people were staying there, but some people were visiting there. What I found interesting when I was looking at the case is learning the anatomy of a rig. And I've already put that as sort of like a segment in my video about how a rig is made up. So if anyone didn't catch this from earlier, is that a reserve parachute is permanently attached to a rig, whereas the main canopy, the one with big colours of whatever, that has like clips. You can actually physically detach it, because what if it gets tangled in a tree or something like that? But a reserve parachute, even though technically speaking that can get tangled, is always going to be attached with very strong nylon to the webbing to the rig. So if that comes loose, it's no accident. It's not a case of fraying. It's not a case of unless something just sliced through it in midair, which is very, very unlikely, that has physically been severed. And what was interesting to note when I was looking at this is whoever sabotaged the parachute, because I believe it was sabotage, I don't believe it was suicide, is whoever did it was very proficient with the knowledge of the anatomy of a rig, because they knew not only how to make sure that there's no way that Stephen would survive, they knew what the pre-flight checks entailed. Now, there's several pre-flight checks. The one they do before they put the jumpsuit on, the one they do of themselves and each other before they get on the plane, and one last pre-flight check in the plane. And whoever it was knew that all three of those checks would not have picked up on the sabotage. And one thing that I actually went on Reddit to the subreddit for skydiving. I wanted to ask some people who've been skydiving for years, because if you think back in 2003, probably equipment back then is probably not as advanced as it is now. And I actually heard, did you hear on the podcast that after this incident, sales of sabotage-proof rigs rocketed?
Yes.
People were so scared. I don't know how they would be considered sabotage-proof. Maybe you physically can't get at the webbing of the reserve parachute or something like that. But that's always a good idea, to have one that's completely sabotage-proof.
Yes, that's it.
But when I asked on because I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are as why I don't think it's suicide. I don't know whether you want to sort of go with read your theory first of all, what you think.
Yes, but there were two options that what I found, really. I probably will get to the murder thing in a bit, really, because when I was talking with my dad about it, this is like a thing that was concluded. So the second case, that was suicide, but I wrote it as the second case. The murder was the first case in the report. But we knew that in both the documentaries and the podcast, Stephen wasn't suicidal. And he had a little bit of a rough period because his relationship was about to close, and he failed his exams in his first year twice. And then also he had an addiction to skydiving equipment. And with that addiction, it led him to be in series of debt. And beforehand, he always used to had to rely on someone with money, particularly his parents.
Yeah.
But there was something that happened that could be a possibility, because when people think that they aren't suicidal, if a person doesn't look suicidal, they just think, that's it, it's not.
Yeah, with mental health, you just don't know, do you? You know, how somebody's feeling inside.
Yeah, that's it. And then it just covers up, they camouflage it to prove that they won't do it, because a few days before, he went to Alton Towers with his girlfriend, and he took his dad to a Bon Jovi concert and all of that. But then he was it's his religion as well, because I found that through his religion that this is quite interesting, because I come from a Roman Catholic family myself, and although I don't believe in most things in the Bible, there were a few passages to say that suicide is a mortal sin.
Yes.
And I found that there was many passages, but three of them stood out for me as well, including one from the Ten Commandments, you shall not murder, and it just basically said for anybody.
Yes.
But then I found out that even though there were suspects for murder, I'm kind of thinking, if it was suicide, was it suicide to make it look like it was a murder?
Potentially. It could well have been he didn't want people to think he would have killed himself, and so he made it look like that. The reason I don't think it was suicide was for several reasons. Is he, he was a party animal. He loved to. Skydivers are like rock stars. They party like hell, and I'm not sure. I'm sure if you saw it on the documentary, the night before Stephen died, they had the time of their lives. They went for it, and the day of Stephen's death, that particular dive, if he was going to kill himself, he knew he would die on that dive. But there was but there was no guarantee that he and his team would do an absolute, excuse my turn of phrase here, killer dive.
That's it.
They did. He wouldn't have known. I mean, anything could have happened. Because they didn't come off the plane cleanly. It was a bit of a shaky start, but then they recovered so well. They scored 19 points for doing 19 different manoeuvres. That is unheard of for an intermediate team. He wouldn't have known whether or not they would have done that. Anything could have happened which could have thrown that off. They would have had to have had another go. And I don't think he would have left his teammates in that position unless he knew for certain that he could go out with a bang. I don't want to use that phrase. And because that would have won them the competition, hands down. they would have been, that party that night would have trumped that original party the night before. That would have, they probably would have got, I don't know, not a monetary reward, but he probably would have been rewarded with more dives, I don't know, which is what he loved doing. And another thing is, I don't think he would have, like, things like his debts and everything, like, they said that because he was going into the forces, and that would have given him security. He and his girlfriend weren't entirely serious, and but then again, you don't always know. And I think because he was an adrenaline junkie, that he was so addicted to it that he didn't want to stop doing it. But one thing that really clinches it for me is the steps that he took to try and save his life. He activated the Cypress. And one thing that I asked on the Reddit forum was, when activating the Cypress, which is done on the ground, you don't do it in the air, is you do it obviously before you put the rig on. Then you check your own gear, and then your teammates, they check each other's gear. And I said to them on subreddit, look, is checking that the Cypress is on part of a pre-flight check that your teammates would do? Because if it was, and Stephen was planning on killing himself, surely the best way to go through with it would be to not even bother activating the Cypress, and not bothering trying to even attempt to pull his main canopy. He would have just let himself go.
Yes, that's true, actually.
Yeah. And that would have been the easiest way of doing it. But if the pre-flight check from his teammates involved checking the Cypress, then I can understand why he would activate it, just in case of that. But on the subreddit, they said it depended on where the Cypress was on his rig. If it was under the flap of the canopy, they wouldn't have seen it.
I've missed that. I've really missed that point.
Yeah, and even if they did, if they lifted it up, they would have, because they lift up the top flap to see if the pin is lodged correctly. If the Cypress was there, they would have seen it there. Where they wouldn't have seen the Cypress is if it was on the underside of the rig against his body. They wouldn't have taken the rig off to check. But it's more likely than not it was under where the pin is on his main canopy. So, but then again, even if he said, "Oh, by the way, Stephen, you haven't activated your Cypress," then I can understand why he would do that. But even if that's the case, why would he even bother severing the bridle between the pilot chute of the main canopy and the canopy? He would just not bother deploying it. He would, if he wanted to make sure that reserve parachute flew away, he would have only cut the webbing of the reserve parachute. He just wouldn't even have bothered trying to deploy the main canopy. Some people have argued that he did it the way he did, if it was suicide, so that he knew he couldn't back out of it. But why would he even bother trying to deploy? Because he actually tried to deploy both. He released the pilot chutes of both, the main and the reserve. Why would he even bother if he knew that they'd been severed beyond anything? And some people are saying maybe he was just hoping for a miracle that he'd be able to catch hold of one or the other. I doubt that very much, because he knew the anatomy of a skydiving rig so much that he would have known exactly how to sabotage it beyond any help. And I don't think, because he could have changed his mind at any point. And when travelling at terminal velocity, I did a bit of a calculation, he would have hit the ground in just over a minute as soon as they exited that plane, in about 65, 70 seconds. He would have hit the ground in that time. So that makes sense as to why Adrian Blair saw the reserve parachute, because when he deployed his chute, Stephen was already on the ground, because when you deploy your chute, of course, you slow down. But travelling at terminal velocity, you'd be dead way before those two other teammates got to the ground. It just seems to me that Stephen behaved as if he didn't know that his own rig was sabotaged. But then again, it could be, like you said, he maybe tried to make it look like murder so nobody would think that he would do that to himself.
Yes, that's definitely interesting. But yeah, sorry, you go, Jasper.
No, it's fine. I'm interested in hearing what else you're thinking of, because you said, because there were 3 suspects originally. There was the 2 teammates, Adrian Blair and David Mason. They were both arrested, and an unknown man, a 24-year-old man who was a student at a military school in Leeds, who was there at the time. Nobody knows who this person is. All 3 of them were released without charge. But who is the 4th, did you think?
The 4th one, I believed, was his girlfriend.
You reckon?
Well, I wasn't really known for sure, because when I did the suspects, I put what I written. There is no history on how Stephen and Ruth met, but there was evidence to believe that she might not have liked the idea of her boyfriend doing skydiving. She tried it once herself, but she told Stephen she wasn't a fan. And at one time, she joked about Stephen getting a withdrawal sentence for a few days despite his experience. But before the incident, his relationship was on the rocks, and they had the last day at the Alton Towers. But following that, Ruth went on holiday, but she didn't find out about Stephen's death for a few days after the 4th of July. But I wondered did she do it to get rid of her boyfriend? Did she do it to get rid of her boyfriend behind his back, or was she part of the group who wanted to sabotage his own parachute? But this is the thing, though. This was the thing I was like really, really debating about. But since she went off on holiday, that was no evidence to prove that, really. I think.
No, that's true. And actually, looking at the documentary with her, I think she comes across as genuine. I don't think that she would have gone to those lengths to have him killed when their relationship wasn't serious, and neither one of them would have been bothered about going, right, see ya. You know. So I mean, it's an open theory. I think that you're very, very good to, expand on the list of suspects, but it's, for me, I think it's probably one at the very bottom of the list.
Yeah,
but
I definitely agree.
Yeah, the ones who had the most opportunity and potentially motive, well, but then again, it was kind of like nobody could find a motive, would have been his teammates. Those two.
That's the 2 teammates as well. The teammates, I think, Adrian Blair, when I did the research, there was hardly anything about him except when he saw the parachute going down, and then after being questioned by the police, he went to Canada. But David, I thought it was really interesting because David Mason, he knew everything, and he possibly knew the ropes, and he even checked the parachute on the actual day of Stephen's death. Times, and I'm wondering if he was checking to see if the parachute wasn't attached without Stephen's knowledge and cleverly hiding it.
Quite potentially, but if you remember the scissors that were found in Stephen's car, they were tested, and they were the scissors that were used to cut the rigging. But I think, and because Ruth actually said, because she was studying forensic science, that Stephen was someone who was, to use her turn of phrase, forensically aware. That he would have known that if he really wanted to make it look like murder, he would never have hidden the scissors in his car. He would have known that they could be tested. So I think, and also anyone had access to his car. Nobody locked their cars. And
no, that's it.
Yeah, and there's another part of me that thought, What if someone got it wrong? What if somebody was targeting somebody else? But if we remember, Stephen's rig was very distinctive because it was just black, white and grey. Most rigs have many different colours or different patterns, so it would have been easy for someone to identify it as his. But even if it were a case of mistaken identity, if you're gonna do that to somebody, you've got to be absolutely sure you're getting the right person, particularly as that was the only rig that was sabotaged. Every single rig in that place was pulled apart, and nothing else had been touched. And in addition, if it was a case of mistaken identity, whoever it was put those scissors in Stephen's car. So,
and then also there wasn't DNA evidence as well.
Yeah.
And with the DNA evidence that's to be on the scissors, my theory is for the scissors, even though with the access to the car, I'm wondering if someone who used the scissors wore gloves at the time just to cover up their DNA.
That's right. And actually, when I was looking into skydiving, is that they all wear gloves all the time because of scrapes and stuff. And even on some hot summer's days, they have to wear gloves all the time. So gloves are all everywhere. I don't know whether the police procured all of the gloves. I know that they procured a lot of stuff, but I don't think that what they should have done was they should have got everybody to put all of their clothes that they're wearing that day or worn that day all into different bags. They should have seized everything.
And they didn't.
They didn't. They checked everybody's rig, which was great. They took DNA from everybody, which was great. But then, what they should have done is, I'm sorry, but everybody should have been stopped bullet naked. Everybody's clothes should have been seized. Everybody's car mats should have been seized, because whoever it was probably maybe went and sat in their car or went and drove their car. Speaking of which, the petrol station Kirk's Corner that Stephen drove to on the Wednesday, I think it was the Wednesday. It was the night before, or the day before. No, 2 days before. It was the Tuesday that he drove to Kirk's Corner. Now, I don't think this is as suspicious as people are making it out, because I looked up Kirk's Corner on Google Maps, and the police said it was out of the way and you'd only know it's there if you were looking for it or you came across it by accident. For one thing, I didn't think it was that out of the way. It didn't look too unusual as far as petrol stations are concerned. And don't you do that with petrol stations? You either actively know that they're there or you come across them by accident. How else are you going to find it?
Well, that's it. And if they had services at petrol stations at the time, because with some of them you could buy food and drink, and if he did stop at local ones, they didn't have the food and drink that he wanted it, and that's why he went. And then if that was the case, and he knew he was not going to use his car at the airfield, he didn't bother to put his petrol on, and he was just like, I'll just fill it up on another time, really. And if it doesn't work while I'm in the airfield anyway, I can just buy a can of petrol or diesel.
Yeah, exactly. And I think because CCTV footage was captured to show he was there, plus the receipt. But how do we know that he didn't drive around afterwards, and that's how he wasted the petrol in his car? So while he was at Kirk's Corner, he probably didn't fill up in his car because he either forgot, or he didn't have enough money on him, or he was like, well, like you said, is it really a bit of an issue? People are saying as well, why did he drive the 11 miles when there were closer petrol stations? Well, maybe he was just going for a drive and just happened to go across it. Maybe because he didn't know the area, did he? He wasn't from Hibblesstow. He was from Wiltshire, so he probably didn't know the area that intimately. So he was probably just going, I don't know what to do, and then just decided on the spur of the moment to stop there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I know. I think people read into that a little bit too much, maybe, but that's just my view. I mean, do you have any additional theories on that?
This is well, I don't know anything about the what was it? I'm sorry, I'm trying to turn the pages just to see, because I want to get to the murder. But I don't have any theories about, like, the car, because, car petrol stations, it's just regular, and it wasn't really interesting to me, in my knowledge, really, even though people think it is suspicious or not. But I did whilst I was writing the murder case.
Sorry.
It's that it's okay. I was
Product
starting
placement.
to.
Sorry. It's not working. Stupid. Sorry, you carry on.
It's okay. Anyway, I was just like thinking to myself, okay, after gathering the evidence that what I had, I wanted to make up a story because I know I do a lot of creative writing and I like the story to play out in my head. And
cool.
there was some things that I didn't really look at this. So, for instance, this was one of them. Like during the competition, some participants slept in their cars, and Stephen was obviously one of them. Mm-hmm. It was hard to determine how easily accessible the car was, but when it was opened, there was the pair of scissors, and then I go on to that. And then I went into the kit room because I wrote, before the straps were cut, we need to look back on the events of the night before, which could lead up to how it happened, and describe the kit room on the airfield. A kit room was where all the parachutes were kept. There were three problems with the kit room if an incident like Stephen's death occurred. One, the room wasn't monitored, therefore people could have had easy access to go in without a key or a box to put in a code. Mm-hmm. Two, it had a lounge, so any person can go inside either alone or a group. And the third one, which I don't think it's likely, but this is something I wanted to put down anyway, it was money. Usually some people in the competition would bring their own parachutes. But if there were others who don't have one, they could buy and borrow a parachute for £5. And Stephen did bring his own one on the airfield and on the day of the incident. And it was black, white and grey. But because the parachutes all have different colours except for the reserved, which is completely white.
Yeah.
And it always goes, but it said, I put it on there looking back onto the night of the 3rd of July. There was a late night party, everyone was socialising and playing games, but no one remembered anything on the following day because everybody was drunk. And I'm wondering, with the sabotage, if everyone was drunk and they did not remember it, I wondered that the few theories I've had was that, one, if one person was sober, which claimed it may or may not be true, and if they've gone into the kit room to cut the parachute, because Stephen's parachute was likely to be in the kit room, because it was like not secured enough, and then they would just do it anyway on the night before. Two, maybe it could have been an accident, because with people when they go drunk, they do like really silly things, and then that could have happened really when they had or when a group or a person had one too many. Or could it happen I might have to double check because I think I have got something, but I think it might be likely I have two. But yeah, there was two actually, not three. But I know that on the day after, because everyone was probably recovering from a hangover and they weren't ready for a competition, what happened was that David actually checked Stephen's parachute, like I said before, about once, and he said everything was fine. And Stephen also checked his own parachute, and thought, okay, that's fine, but I wonder if there's something he missed because they were in a rush because it was their turn, or could it be something else? It's just a thing that really puzzles me. But I think, from what I understand, it wasn't a drunken accident. Someone deliberately did it. Yeah. Either the party was going on, or when everyone was asleep in the airfield, whether it was a lounge room, in the kit room, or in their cars.
The one thing that the chief instructor said is that the kit room is locked and alarmed at the end of the day. So when they were partying, the kit room was locked and alarmed. However, somebody who had a key or knew how to get the key or knew how to get in could easily have done it. And I did actually ask on Reddit, is this a kind of sabotage that even someone who's proficient or even intimate knowledge, because this was an intermediate level competition, Could anyone have done this drunk, knowing what they're doing? You know, knowing both how to completely sabotage a parachute beyond anything, and B, know how to do it to hide it from even a chief instructor who would not even be looking for something like that. And the only thing that people said was possibly. You know, you just don't know. I mean, it depends on how drunk they are. It also depends on whether they were alone. It could have been a two-person job.
That's another true theory.
That's true, because if you remember, the actual frayed or the cut parts of the bridle of the main chute and the webbing of the reserve had multiple people's DNA, but then the scissors only had Stephen's DNA.
I missed that.
But then again, Stephen's reserve parachute, he was not qualified to pack his own reserve parachute. So whoever packed his parachute last, or whoever, if anyone ever did actually inspect his parachute before, their DNA would be on it. So it's inconclusive. With the pilot chute, they never pull it out. But then again, Stephen packed his own parachute, or they think he packed his own parachute because he was qualified to do that. He wouldn't have paid £5 for someone to do it when he could have done it himself. But then how do we know that other people haven't touched that pilot chute before? You know,
exactly.
So that in itself is inconclusive. I think when it comes to this, they won't get, at least my opinion is, because of the scissors, which, you know, they weren't group scissors, they weren't Hibblestow's scissors, they were Stephen's scissors. Is whoever did it used gloves, therefore they won't find their DNA on the straps. That's just my opinion. That if any point technology is advanced to the point that they can identify every single piece of DNA on those straps, I don't think that they will show the murderer's DNA, or unless the murderer has touched them at a different time. So that's just my view, that I don't think the murderer touched them with their bare hands. I think the murderer would have been meticulous enough not to do that, because they could have cut themselves on the scissors and got blood everywhere, and if anyone would have seen blood on the rigging, they would have gone, whoa, 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 what's this? You know what I mean? So they could have thought, you know, I just don't want to put any sort of greasy fingerprints over the rig. I don't want him to know anyone's touched it. So I think whoever did it used their skydiving gloves. That's just my view.
Yes, that's very true, actually. I did miss loads of it, because I did loads of research as well, but there were points that I have missed out. And like what you said, I definitely missed that, because I didn't really know about that, because I wanted to get into something that wasn't being touched, and it was something that it could either be a rumor, a speculation, or inconclusive theory or something like that as well. But I really didn't know that it was alarmed and secured late at night, and that was the thing that really changed my mind on things. And I was like, okay, that's interesting.
That's what they think, that it was before the early hours of that night. It was probably, if it was alarmed and locked, and whoever went in there didn't have the key, it would have been, because they started drinking quite early in their day. It was around 2:00 when they started drinking. A lot of people do. The drinking doesn't just start in the evening. A lot of people start the day drinking. That some people would have been drunk before the kit room was locked. So they may have been drunk enough to the point that they did this, and then it was locked, and then they got so drunk they forgot what they did.
That's it. I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, Stephen's. The only thing that people could come up with, that Stephen was a cocky little lad. You know, he was a lovable rogue. You know, that some people probably thought that performing monkey, you know, singing Bon Jovi. I mean, who does he think he is? But that was really late at night when the party was really in full swing, and I think the kit room would have been locked at that point. But then again, how do you know if anybody, you know, whoever it was in charge of the keys, I don't know who was in charge of the keys, whether anybody nab them, or whether there was a code somebody knew, or whether they would, because they would have had to have done it at a time when nobody knew what they were doing, because surely because that kit room was full of parachutes. They were all on pegs everywhere. That if someone was fiddling about with somebody's parachute that they knew not to be theirs, somebody would have said something to the police, you'd think. But what is it they said on the podcast, which was that the skydiving community is quite intimate. There's a lot of people in there, but at the same time, they value loyalty and they probably don't like snitches. So it could be that some people kept watch and said, right, just one moment, something's going on in here, don't come in. And maybe people are just too scared to say something.
Yeah, that's true, actually.
Possibly. But then I can't think of why anyone would target Stephen. As I said, the scissors being in his car and the fact that gloves were used, for me, that says that it was actually murder. It wasn't someone mistaken identity. I don't think Stephen did it himself because of the measures he took to save his life. If he really wanted to commit suicide, he probably would have used his hook knife, which all rigs have, to cut the webbing while he was in mid-flight. He would have had time to do that if he wanted to. So if he really wanted to make sure the main canopy flew away, he would have deployed it and then disconnected it. Or he wouldn't have bothered in the first place. I think given that jump, that jump could have been disastrous, and they could have gone, right, let's do this again, let's try and see if we can win again. And if he died on that attempt, he would have completely he would have gone out a failure. And I don't think I know it's only a competition, but I still think he probably would have said, right, he probably would have done it on a different time. And don't forget, he also did a dive on the Tuesday. Was it the Tuesday or the Wednesday?
It was the Friday.
The Friday was when he died, but he actually did one practice dive on the Wednesday, which was just before Adrian and David arrived. So if he was planning to die, why wouldn't he have done it then? And also, as I said, because then he definitely would not have been able to go through the competition, and there's no way that he would have known how that final dive would have panned out. And he actually got the cameraman to assess his technique for criticism. Maybe that was in preparation for doing the best dive of his life. But again, nobody has a crystal ball. Nobody can tell how something's going to go, no matter how hard you try.
That's it, because I know in the podcast as well, there was, I need to think back, because there's another evidence to prove this. In the podcast, from what I listened to, the evidence to support that was murder, once he found out that both of the parachutes weren't working, Stephen's last words in the cornfield, before he landed in the cornfield, his last words were, "Oh my God, I'm going to die." And that was the last things he ever said before he landed in the cornfield. And that was witnessed by someone who heard him just near close by.
I don't think that was Stephen. I think that was somebody else whose parachute was sabotaged. I don't think that was Stephen. I think that was a similar incident they mentioned, where I think it was a lady whose parachutes had been sabotaged, and it was only when she realised that it wasn't working, then she looked up at the camera, and that's what she said. But when in Stephen's case, as they finished their formation, the camera lost sight of them, and it had to be quite a bit above to know, and they would have had to have separated before they even attempted to deploy their parachutes, by which point the cameraman lost them. So I don't think anybody caught that. But what they did say on the podcast is that Stephen would have had to have gone through about 10 to 20 seconds knowing that this was going, oh my God, I'm going to die and there's nothing I can do. There was a picture of the indentation in the cornfield. I've saved it on my phone, actually, because what I was doing was I compared it, because I was trying to figure out where the location he actually fell, because it's not anywhere. And I was trying to find out on Google Maps using Street View of the fields as to which field it was, and I've narrowed it down.
Okay, I don't think I've seen like the picture before, because it's just like one of those things. Okay, that's kind of like similar to what I saw in the documentary that was on YouTube. That's just definitely similar.
Yeah, there was an incident where another lady's parachute was sabotaged, where I think it was that one that you were mentioning about the where she was looking up at the camera. She fell into a cornfield, but the cornfield had been ploughed, so all of the sheaths were lined down. So instead of falling onto them up, which didn't break Stephen's fall, she fell onto like a cushion of corn. It was still very hard, and she still was hurt quite badly, but that's how she survived. If that cornfield had been ploughed, if all the sheaths of corn had been left, Stephen probably would have survived. But then he could have landed on a road. Nobody would have known wherever he would have landed. He could have landed in some trees. He could have landed on a roof. Nobody
could have landed anywhere.
Exactly. I think landing in a cornfield is usually the norm because that's the biggest surface area, and also I think because of the way that they'd spread out, it was likely. But that location, I think, was very, very close to a road, so he could have hit a road. A car could have seen him, or he could have hit a car, or anything.
Like kill that way. And there was one thing that I had to narrow it down with the suspect, the reasons why. And with the reasons why, I put it into two theories because I've found out something that it could have possibly happened. And the first thing that I found was life insurance, and then the other was the rumoured love triangle between Steve and Ruth, and most likely David Manchin, I think.
Yeah.
But if it was life insurance, definitely him, because from what I believe, Stephen was originally wanted to take insurance, but he actually, from what I believed, he claimed for joint insurance. And if someone actually claimed joint life insurance, which only involves two people, but mainly if it's for spouses, but if it involves two people, that it can be someone that's outside the family. And if someone was to die, suicide or a murder can be an option, or an unexpected death. Can't really claim that suicide was the reason for life insurance for death within a 12-month period, but afterwards it can be. Maybe to believe that money was one of the options, but then the love triangle was that if it was rumoured, and if it was true that Ruth and Stephen would have broken up, the love triangle would involve one of the friends.
Most likely, because they all went to the same college.
Yes, exactly.
And so it's possible. I think, because David and Adrian were both the same age. And Stephen was only a year or two older. He wasn't that much older. But David and Adrian trained together in skydiving. So they kind of fell in love with it together, and apparently they became close friends. And they went to the cinema the night before the party, when Stephen went out to buy his wig and dress and that. So why didn't he go with them to the cinema? It seems that David and Adrian were close. Now, this is not to accuse them of anything, but if one of them was responsible, my feeling is that the other knew, or they were both complicit. And what is a bit strange is that out of everybody they would have interviewed, these 100 or so people, why was it that one person in that Leeds University that was arrested? And let's not forget, they weren't just brought in for questioning, they were actually arrested.
Yes.
The police don't make an arrest lightly. And the only other two people who were arrested were his teammates, they had more than ample opportunity. But this other person who didn't actually know Stephen very well, the actual reasons for why they were arrested, I think it's something that they said, or something that they incriminated themselves, I think. rather than forensic evidence. But even then, for the police to say, right, you're being arrested, and they were held for, I think, 48 hours. Yes, they were released without charge, but to be arrested, it takes quite a bit. They can't just do that on a whim. So it seems to me that maybe this was a wider conspiracy, potentially.
Yes, that's it. And from what I read and understand, because after they were released, Adrian and David must have parted their ways, really, because they were like, even though they may have knew, they would have been scarred by it. And Adrian moved to Canada.
He did.
And
yeah.
I'm wondering, it really affects. And I'm wondering, did it really affect Adrian's health, or mental health, just because of that? Because even though if he knew, he just thought, it's too much, I've got to get away. And I think Adrian, even though he knew, he's not the main murderer, I think, in a way. But because even though he was just like completely out of the picture and not mentioned much, I think he was kind of like if you think of the hero villain terms, the sidekick.
Yes.
That's what I'm thinking. So I've come to the conclusion when I was researching that it's David who's the murderer.
You reckon?
Not Adrian.
Yeah, I mean, we've got to be very careful that we're not openly accusing anybody of anything. But these are just theories. But my suspect list is getting shorter and shorter, and there could have been somebody there who was. I think I mentioned this to you earlier on Twitter. This could have been a contract killing. Yes,
I definitely remember you telling me that, but. I don't know what a contract killing was, because I tried to research it, but I couldn't figure out what it was or actually what it meant.
It's a bit like on the last true crime video I did, that was a contract killing. It was where an ex-husband had his ex-wife killed by a hitman.
Yes.
Yeah. And so this could have been a case of, but they'd need to make sure the person who did it knew what they were doing with the rig, knew the opportunity. But if it's somebody who knew Stephen from in Wiltshire, who said, right, you're going to be going over here to this place or whatever, I'm going to pay you X amount of money to kill Stephen. But somebody would have had to have paid money for that or made some sort of deal for that, like you said with the life insurance. So it seems to me as well that if it was going to be somebody contracted, surely they would have sabotaged Stephen's rig at the earliest opportunity and not left it all week, because he arrived on the he arrived on the Saturday afternoon or the Sunday afternoon, and it was the Friday that he was killed. Why was it left that long?
That's it.
Yeah, because nobody knew, because the weather was a bit crap, about when they would be doing it. So whoever, for all they knew, it may never have happened. Whoop, I just knocked my pop vinyl down. Sorry about that. I've just knocked my pop vinyl down. Sorry. Sorry about that. But yeah, for all they knew, the competition could have been off for that week. But then what they could have done is say, well, he's going to have to jump at some point with that thing, and when he does, he's going to die. So.
Yeah, that's it, exactly. And there was like a prediction thing that there was a few words, but I don't know if he was self-predicting his death, or maybe if it was like still the murder case, if it was either one of the two, either David or Adrian. Oh gosh, what was it you said? Because they were the only witnesses to hear what he said. But yes. Stephen said to them, if I was to die, I would have died in style by skydiving.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of conversation that most skydivers will probably have, because if they love it that much, they would say, I want to die that way or whatever. You know, it's like soldiers saying, I want to die by the sword or whatever. I want to die in action, you know. I think that's probably how they meant it. But as you said, they apparently agreed that that's how they would go too. So
it's spooky though, because if it was spooky. A coincidence though.
It is absolutely so. I think we know who's probably at the top of our list, but again, we can't. We're not the police. We can't issue an arrest warrant. We can't, accuse anybody. But I think potentially, and I think we've kind of come to the conclusion that it's very unlikely to be suicide. that it's more than like the evidence points to murder. The way that he tried, like even the chief instructor said he tried to save his life.
Well, I think my thoughts are, because I know I didn't mean to like accuse anyone, but when I said David's name, because again, I had to really think about the story behind it. Because if it was David, but I still think it is, but if it was to be him, if I was a police officer or a detective, like the Agatha Christie's detectives or Sherlock Holmes, I would have thought about that. Because this is the thing, though, because on the party on the night before, there was an argument between Stephen and someone else, but someone who heard that, they didn't know who the other person was. And I think it was kind of likely that it was to do with the love triangle, and it would have been David, or it could have been Adrian if I was wrong.
Yeah.
But then also, I also think that if it was suicide, and if Stephen did do like life insurance, it's like that he did it so people don't get his money. Or maybe it could be something else, which is either to do with jealousy and possibly money, but then it could be just jealousy of either way, really, if it was love or just financial support. But either way, really, the main thing behind it all was probably something to do with jealousy, I think.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, like, people could have said, like, you know, Stephen, he's a bit of a cocky so-and-so, and, oh, he's so but then he's so meticulous with health and safety, you know, or something like that. It could have just been somebody going, I'll teach that a lesson, but then teaching somebody a lesson, they're not going to live to heed it, are they? And David Mason had previously played pranks on Stephen by doing little sabotages to his gear, but he would do them so that they would be picked up by the pre-flight checks. So it was more to annoy him rather than cause him any real harm.
So that could be a prank gone wrong then. I missed that because I really didn't really figure that one out.
I think I did hear about somebody saying it could have been a prank gone wrong, but I think with this type of sabotage, because it was so meticulously done, not only so that there was no hope of anything ever saving him, but also it was done in a way to hide it, that I think it was probably a prank gone too far. I think it was the ultimate prank. So it could have been like, obviously they would have known it would have killed him, but say, right, okay, this guy, he you know, he's so meticulous with stuff. He was a talented young man with, you know, he was a great skydiver at such a young age. He was, I don't know whether he was captain of Black Rain, but he was doing so well that somebody may have, like you said, it could have been jealousy, it could have been somebody just not liking his attitude, but to the point that to kill him, it would have had to been quite extreme. So someone with a strong dislike for him, probably. But who concealed it probably very well. You know, keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
Or a wolf in sheep's clothing, in a way.
Quite potentially. Yeah. So anyway, it's been really, really good discussing it. And I think I've got definitely my chief suspect. But but then again, as we've said, disclaimer, can't accuse anybody. But then again, thank you so much for this. Do you want to do this again one day?
Oh, yes, definitely. And thank you so much for having me on, Barry. I really, really enjoyed it. And I've definitely, if you need another mystery, hook me up. Yeah, definitely. I've got a few mysteries lined up. This is also for my little berries to hear. I want to do the, I'm going to give you these names now, Sez, so you could always make a note of them if you like. I want to do the mystery of Kendrick Johnson. Oh, okay. Lars Matank. The Jameson family. That just makes me absolutely mad. That one does. There was another one. I can't remember what the hell it is. I can't remember. But there was another one which is an open verdict again, a little bit like this one, accident or suicide. I think that was the Kendrick Johnson one, but I think that there was another one and I can't remember what it was.
but there's quite a few unsolved ones that I really want to cover, because all my previous ones, apart from the Michael Jackson one, of course, all solved. And solved ones are great because closure is great, but lack of closure like this just makes me crazy. And so, yeah. But anyways, thank you so much, Sez. I really, really appreciate that. And I see you. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying thank you so much. It was really great having on, and I did have fun though. And I know I like smiled a few times and giggled, but it was just like me trying to feeling very impressed really about how everything's going. And just by the way, it's not me being a total douchebag or something. This is just me
no, that's fine. I'm pretty sure, because anyone who actually watches Cez's channel knows that she's just a lovely breath of fresh air. She's always smiling, always happy, and everything. And we've I think you were one of the first. I think, how did we meet? Do you remember how we met? Was it through the school YouTuber community or something? Or
yeah, it was through the social media community, but we met through Dan, who's Aspie from the Aspie world.
Yes, we did. Because you like me, you're autistic as well, and if many people out there know one thing about autism is that when we can get obsessed with a subject. So I'm pretty sure this is something that became a bit of a mini obsession for you. You become so hyper focused, and I think that's really, really good for people like us. Especially in lockdown, it's always good to have something to occupy your mind. Yeah, we could be I don't know, sort of like a two woman sleuthing team. That would be really, really cool.
Oh, that would be amazing.
I know. Oh my god, it'd be so good. But yeah, if we I'd love to have you on for another discussion. I'd like to bring in maybe some other people too, but then again, I'd like to do another few ones with you. But so those three, Kendrick Johnson, Lars Matank and the Jameson family, are the three main ones that I want to do as my next unsolved ones, because I think they have most weight to them, especially the one about Lars Matank, because he's never been found. Nobody knows what happened to him. It was a German bloke who went missing in Bulgaria, and there's CCTV footage about his last movements, and it's just very strange about why he disappeared with no trace. Thank you very much for watching, Little Berries, and thank you very much to Cez for your brilliant intellect that you've brought to this video, and I hope we will get to do this again. So, as I've said, I want to do Lars Matank, Kendrick Johnson, I want to do the Jameson family, I want to do many others that are unsolved so we can discuss this, and thank you very much again. Bye!